Hello, my name is Kristen. On the night of my own graduation party, my father raised a glass and smiled, telling the room, "Let's finally be rid of her." My mother slipped poison into my champagne while my sister laughed, calling me the family's longest-running project. Everyone clapped. Everyone toasted. And I sat there, silent, realizing this wasn't a celebration. It was an execution dressed as a party. What would you have done if the people meant to love you most decided you were disposable? The evening air in Houston was heavy with warmth, the kind that clung to my skin and made every step toward the Lancaster Hotel feel deliberate, weighted. I had told myself countless times on the drive over that this was supposed to be my night, a celebration of perseverance, of finishing something most people had doubted I would ever complete. But as I walked up the steps, past the valets in black vests and the long line of luxury cars pulling away from the curb, a knot in my stomach reminded me that my family never gave me anything without a catch. Inside, the grandeur was impossible to ignore. Chandeliers glittered above polished marble floors, throwing fractured light across tables dressed in ivory linens and towering centerpieces of white orchids. The smell of roses and expensive perfume mingled in the air, sweet yet suffocating. Guests in sequined gowns and tailored suits filled the space with polished chatter, their voices rising above the faint notes of a string quartet. I slowed as I crossed the threshold, watching the staged smiles from relatives who barely acknowledged me outside of gatherings like these. Cousins waved politely but didn't move closer. An uncle gave me a nod that felt more like an obligation than affection. Even before I spoke to anyone, I could sense the undercurrent. This wasn't my celebration. This was another performance for them. I told myself to hold steady, to walk with my head high, because if there was one thing I had learned in my 30s, it was that dignity wasn't given, it was claimed. Sometimes the prettiest places hide the sharpest knives, I whispered under my breath, repeating words I once read in a novel that stuck with me like a scar. Tonight would prove how true that saying could be. As I approached the check-in desk, a young woman in a neat black dress smiled and reached for the guest list. Her smile faltered, though, when her eyes dropped to the page. "Oh, I think there may be a mistake," she said softly, hesitating as if she wished she could swallow her words back. "What kind of mistake?" I asked, though my pulse already told me I knew. She turned the clipboard toward me. My name wasn't there. Instead, it read, "Guest of Celine Calloway." My sister. A burn rose in my chest, the kind that no amount of air conditioning could cool. My lips pressed together in a line so tight I thought they might split. I knew immediately this wasn't a clerical error. It was deliberate. A small, insidious erasure. The hostess fumbled, cheeks flushed. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. Let me see if—" "It's fine," I cut in, my voice even though my hands shook at my sides. "I'm sure it's exactly how it was written." Her eyes darted around nervously, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the humiliation clung to me like a second skin. Even here, on my night, they couldn't resist finding a way to make me invisible. I forced myself to walk forward, heels clicking against marble that suddenly felt like a stage beneath me. Family is supposed to be your safe harbor, I thought, as I caught sight of Celine across the room, bathed in attention and glowing in designer silk. Mine was always the storm. The ballroom swelled with laughter and clinking champagne flutes as I entered. Heads turned, people called out polite congratulations, but their eyes swept my outfit with the same patronizing pity they had shown me my whole life. My father stood tall near the main table, glass raised, face split into a wide grin. Not for me, but for Celine. I inhaled sharply and straightened my shoulders. If this was theater, then I was no longer willing to play the extra in their script. Still, when I turned toward the seating chart to find my place, I braced myself, and I was right to do so. My name was nowhere near the main table. It wasn't beside my parents or my sister. Instead, I found it printed neatly on a place card stuck to the corner of a table tucked near the hallway leading to the restrooms. The graduate, hidden like an afterthought. Guests noticed, of course. They always noticed. "Isn't she the graduate?" one woman whispered, voice too loud to be discreet. Another shrugged, as if the seating made perfect sense. As if my role in this family was so naturally diminished, it didn't warrant explanation. Celine's eyes caught mine as she glided toward the spotlight table, her lips curving into a smirk sharp enough to draw blood. She didn't have to say a word. The message was clear. This night belonged to her, not me. I swallowed hard and forced a neutral expression as I made my way toward the corner table. My heels sank slightly into the plush carpet, every step reminding me of the distance they had placed between me and the center. Seating wasn't just logistics, it was power, hierarchy carved in paper and ink. And tonight, my family made sure everyone in that room knew exactly where I stood. I sat down quietly, folding my napkin across my lap with deliberate calm. Around me, relatives laughed as if I weren't there. The champagne glasses sparkled in their hands, raised in celebration that had nothing to do with me. Across the room, my father lifted his glass higher, eyes locking on mine. There was no pride in his gaze, no warmth, just something cruel, glinting like a blade beneath candlelight. That was the moment I realized. This party wasn't mine at all. It was theirs, and I was the prey. My father's smile across the ballroom wasn't the kind that warmed you, the kind a child carries as a memory of being cherished. It was tight, calculated, and cruel, as though he had already won some invisible war. He raised his glass deliberately, not toward the room, but toward me, his gaze heavy and unblinking. I could feel the weight of it even through the chatter and clinking of silverware. The guests, sensing the tension, glanced back and forth between us, but said nothing. Their silence wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. Families, especially ones like mine, learn how to dress cruelty in fine suits and sequined gowns. I sat at the far edge of the room, my back straight, refusing to slouch into invisibility, even though they had tucked me into a seat meant to humiliate. I told myself to breathe, to hold my head high, though every nerve felt frayed. Sometimes silence in a family isn't peace, it's permission for harm, I thought, watching him. He was waiting for the right moment to strike, and everyone else was waiting too. The music dipped, and as if on cue, my father rose. His chair scraped against the marble floor, silencing the conversations around him. He lifted his champagne flute with ease, his posture regal, commanding attention like a man accustomed to authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice filling every corner of the hall, "tonight we celebrate something long overdue." He let the pause linger, then added with a smirk that sliced through the room, "Let's finally be rid of her." Laughter rippled, hesitant at first, then bolder. Some guests chuckled nervously, glancing at one another as if to ask if this was acceptable to laugh at. Others laughed openly, eager to show their allegiance to him. My cousin leaned to the person beside him and whispered, "Did he just say that?" As if he hadn't believed his own ears. Celine, draped in silk, raised her glass high, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. She was basking in it. His cruelty aimed at me was always her light. I froze, glass still untouched before me. My chest tightened, but I kept my face neutral. The man who should have been proud of me decided to bury me with a joke, I thought, my voice steady inside my mind, though my hands clenched beneath the table. Shame bled into betrayal, and betrayal hardened into a quiet, tightening anger. I would not give him the spectacle of a breakdown. A waiter appeared at my side, as if on cue, filling my glass again. The pale golden liquid shimmered under the chandelier light. I stared at it, then at the faint swirl forming near the surface, unnatural, lingering too long for simple bubbles. The stem of the glass was cold beneath my fingertips, yet it felt as if it burned. I leaned back slightly, my thoughts running faster than the music that had resumed. Abuse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, hiding itself in rituals, in something as ordinary as a toast. People around me toasted cheerfully, oblivious, clinking glasses while the liquid in mine looked alive, as if it carried a secret. I glanced toward my mother. She sat perfectly composed, her pearl necklace catching the light, her hand brushing against her clutch with a subtle motion. Then it was gone, slipped back into her lap. But in the mirrored ice bucket at the center of the table, I saw what I wasn't supposed to see. Her dropping something fine, a dusting of white, into my glass before the waiter set it down. My throat tightened, not with tears, but with the clarity of betrayal. Guests nearby leaned toward one another. "Why is her glass different?" one murmured. Another scoffed, "Don't be silly, it's champagne." I lowered my gaze just enough to hide the fire building in my eyes. This isn't humiliation anymore, I told myself, my heart pounding in my ears. This is erasure. They don't just want to silence me tonight, they want to remove me. I let the silence inside me solidify, turning into something they couldn't measure. The disgust that rose gave way to dread, but the dread didn't drown me. It sharpened into a fury so controlled it felt almost calm. My hand hovered near the poisoned glass, steady despite the storm inside me. Across the room, my father nodded slightly, believing he had orchestrated the perfect ending. My mother's lips remained curled into her flawless smile, her eyes trained on anything but me. Celine, her glass raised, watched eagerly for me to lift mine. They thought they had cornered me. But they had forgotten one thing. I was watching too. The laughter from my father's cruel toast was still echoing in my ears when the lights dimmed. A hush spread across the ballroom, and the chatter gave way to expectant applause as the projector screen lit up. The words, "The Vayner family through the years," scrolled across the screen in elegant gold lettering. The band shifted to a cheerful tune, and people clapped like this was some grand moment of family pride. I leaned forward slightly, telling myself that maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment I'd see a glimpse of myself reflected back, a sliver of acknowledgement tucked into their carefully curated history. I had worked hard, after all. Tonight was supposed to be about me. My heart betrayed me, lifting with a fragile hope. But as the first images flashed across the screen, the truth landed like a fist. Vacations in the Caribbean, Celine smiling in every frame, golden skin glistening as she posed on yachts, birthdays in mansions, her face bright with candles and jewels. Pageants, trophies, gowns, tiaras, slide after slide rolled by, her life catalogued like a magazine spread, not one picture of me. Guests murmured as the omission became impossible to ignore. "Where's Kristen?" someone whispered a few rows back. Another voice, sharper. "Wasn't this her party?" My father cleared his throat loudly, a sound more like a warning than a cough. Conversations stopped instantly. My mother adjusted her pearl necklace, lips stretched into that tight smile she used whenever she wanted the world to believe everything was perfectly in place. The screen continued its march. Celine at cheerleading competitions, Celine draped in couture at galas, Celine with my parents on ski trips I had never been invited to. Inside me, humiliation twisted into something deeper. It wasn't just insult, it was erasure. Invisibility cuts deeper than insult, I thought, my breath steady though my chest burned. They didn't want to mock me tonight. They wanted to erase me from memory itself. When the slideshow ended, the applause felt forced. Hands came together with the stiffness of people who didn't know what else to do. I clapped once, slowly, then folded my hands in my lap. That was when I felt the hot breath of contempt lean toward me. My aunt, wearing too much perfume and a smile too sharp to be kind, whispered, "You should be grateful they even threw you a party." Her words were not advice, they were dismissal. I turned to her, my face calm. "Gratitude isn't blindness," I said softly, the corners of my lips rising just enough to show I wouldn't cower. She blinked, startled, then looked away, unwilling to push further. The exchange was brief, almost invisible to anyone else, but it mattered. It was proof that I could push back without raising my voice, proof that silence could carry more weight than shouting. I reached for my water, deliberately ignoring the champagne glass still glimmering with menace beside my plate. My gaze swept the room slowly. Celine was laughing with guests at the main table, tossing her hair back as if she hadn't just stolen an entire evening meant for me. My father looked pleased, satisfied that the room was under his control again. My mother sat rigid, every gesture carefully performed, her mask never slipping. I thought of the people in the audience watching all this unfold, relatives, colleagues, friends of the family. How many of them saw what was happening and chose silence? How many had ever been in my shoes, the one in the family everyone diminished because it was easier than facing the truth? I could feel my anger rising again, pressing against the edges of my composure. But anger without strategy is just noise, and I refused to give them that satisfaction. I steadied myself, breathing deeply. The humiliation wasn't just about tonight. It was part of a calculated pattern, a long campaign to erase me from their narrative completely. If that was their plan, then I had to create a counterstory. I folded my napkin slowly, placing it neatly on the table, as though I had made some final decision. My eyes fixed on the main table where my family sat, laughing, sipping, performing. My pulse steadied, and a cold clarity settled over me. If they wanted me erased, I thought, they forgot one thing. I learned to write my own story. After the slideshow ended, the room returned to its normal rhythm, but not quite. Conversations resumed, forks scraped plates, champagne glasses clinked, yet an invisible weight lingered in the air. I could feel it in the sideways glances, in the half-whispered exchanges people thought I couldn't hear. Their silence was louder than any insult. In American families, I thought bitterly, silence often speaks louder than words. It's approval in disguise. I sat straight in my chair, determined to hold myself together, despite the sting still raw from being erased off the screen. I caught my reflection in a silver tray carried by a waiter, shoulders back, chin lifted, face neutral. I looked composed, but beneath the surface, my anger simmered like water just shy of boiling. Respect is earned, I told myself, but humiliation is often handed out freely. The next act of the performance arrived in heels clicking against marble. Vera Ashcroft, my parents' longtime socialite friend, made her way across the floor with the confidence of someone who never doubted her welcome. Diamonds glittered on her fingers, her laugh rang too loud, a sound rehearsed to draw attention. She carried herself like she owned the room, though she owned nothing but gossip and borrowed charm. "Well," she said, planting herself beside me with her circle of sycophants close behind. "So you're the leech daughter I've heard about." The words came coated in a laugh, light enough to be mistaken for banter by someone naive. But the edge was sharp, deliberate. Her friends chuckled politely, waiting to see if I would break, if I would squirm. For a heartbeat, the insult burned through me, shame quick and hot, but I refused to give her the satisfaction. I forced my lips into a small, tight smile. "Funny," I replied evenly, my voice carrying just enough for her little audience to hear. "I thought leeches survive by clinging to power." Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Her face faltered, just for a second. the crack in her performance visible before she snapped it back together with a smirk. One of her friends coughed to cover their awkwardness. She recovered quickly, but the sting had landed where it needed to. I leaned back, not waiting for her next word. My point was made, and my silence afterward spoke louder than any exchange of insults could. Around me, I could feel the subtle shift of the room. Some guests smiled faintly to themselves, others avoided my eyes. Many viewers of a moment like this, if they had been watching, would have recalled their own scars, times when friends of the family assumed they had the right to belittle. Dinner was served in courses, waiters gliding in and out of the ballroom with trays of roasted meats, seasonal vegetables, and crystal bowls of sauces. My hunger had long been lost to the night, but I stood when prompted, moving toward the main table to check the placement of my card. And this was supposed to be the moment where I reclaimed even a sliver of dignity, where I could sit at the table of honor. But there it was, plain and cruel. Celine's name neatly displayed in the spot that should have been mine. My card had been moved to a side table near distant relatives, half hidden in the corner. Whispers rose like smoke. "Isn't she the graduate?" one voice murmured. Another sighed. "It must be a mistake." But the tone betrayed that no one believed it was. I stood there for a breath longer, my pulse steady despite the humiliation pressing against me. My father clapped Celine proudly on the shoulder. "This is where she belongs," he declared, loud enough for the room to hear. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. Instead, I forced a smile, turned, and walked to the lesser table, sliding into my chair with deliberate calm. If they thought they were diminishing me, they didn't realize I was cataloging every slight, storing each humiliation like evidence. Seats aren't just furniture, I thought as I adjusted my napkin. In families like mine, they're symbols of power, and tonight, they wanted the world to see exactly where I stand. I picked up my fork, pushing food around the plate more than eating it. Celine's laugh rose above the rest, sharp and victorious. My father joined in, while my mother nodded, her pearls gleaming under the light, as if that shine could hide the darkness in her eyes. "Sometimes the cruelest punishments," I whispered under my breath, "are staged in plain sight." I looked across the room at them, my family, my executioners dressed as hosts. My fork clattered softly as I placed it back down, my decision taking form as clearly as the candle flames reflected in the glassware. They thought humiliating me would silence me, but what they didn't understand was that I was already planning my move. I rose from my chair with slow deliberation, fingers brushing over the folded note card I had prepared days ago. Each word written on it had been chosen with care, trimmed and polished the way you sand down a sharp edge before it cuts you. The clinking of forks and the low hum of conversations around me fell quiet as people noticed. The attention I had long been denied was, for a moment, mine. Guests turned their heads, murmurs softening as their eyes followed me toward the microphone set at the front of the ballroom. I could sense the curiosity in the air. After all the insults, the erasures, the humiliation, maybe I was finally going to speak for myself. My palms tingled as I adjusted the note card, but it wasn't fear that made them shake. It was the weight of what I wanted to say, the magnitude of finally putting my truth into the air. The words of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. floated in my mind. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I repeated them silently, drawing strength from them, a reminder that my voice mattered, even if they tried to erase it. I faced the crowd, letting the hush settle into something thick and expectant. "Words matter," I whispered inwardly. "And tonight, mine will matter." "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady, my heart pushing the words forward. Then a sharp screech cut through the speakers. A piercing squeal filled the ballroom, followed by silence. The microphone went dead in my hands. A technician hurried forward, crouched, fiddled with the wires. The ballroom waited in silence, watching his hands twist the cable, check the soundboard, smack the side of the speaker. Then he stood, shaking his head, and muttered, "Technical issue." From the main table, my father waved dismissively. "It's fine," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's move on." A ripple of laughter rolled through the guests, awkward and stilted, but effective enough to cover the sting. I remained standing for a breath, microphone useless, before Celine swept forward in her gown and plucked the device from the stand. "Some voices just aren't meant to carry," she said, her tone sweet but sharpened like glass. The crowd laughed louder this time, emboldened by the cruelty, the spectacle. Each laugh jabbed at me, sharper than silence itself. I sat down slowly, refusing to let my movements betray the heat in my chest. They didn't just want to mute me, I thought as I folded my note card back into my lap. They wanted to erase what I might become. But the evening wasn't finished with me. Before dessert was served, my mother rose with a practiced smile. Her voice rang clear as a bell. "Before we continue, I'd like to share a small surprise." Waiters carried a velvet box to her hands, and I knew what it was before she even opened it. My chest tightened, my breath caught, but I held myself steady. Inside was my grandmother Eudora's brooch, an antique piece of sapphire and silver she had promised me when I was a child. It wasn't just jewelry. It was an anchor, a symbol that I had belonged to someone once, that I mattered to at least one person in this family. But my mother didn't call my name. She turned, beaming, and pinned it onto Celine's dress. Applause rose again, polite but approving. Guests murmured admiration. "It suits Celine perfectly, doesn't it?" my aunt whispered, her words digging deeper than the pin itself ever could. I stared at the brooch glinting under the lights, the piece that should have been mine. It wasn't just a theft of an object, it was the theft of legacy, of history, of memory. Legacies aren't stolen in silence, I told myself, forcing my breathing calm. They're stolen in applause. I felt grief rush through me, sharp and raw. But it didn't settle as despair. It crystallized into something harder, betrayal, anger, the kind that hardens into steel when you refuse to bend. I sat back down, spine straight, my face composed as if none of this pierced me. Across the room, Celine preened. My father's hand rested on her shoulder, and my mother maintained her mask of elegance. They thought they had broken me. But every injustice was fuel, every theft another reminder of what they feared most, that I could rise, that I could outlast their schemes. My hand reached for the champagne glass but didn't lift it. Instead, I slid it slightly forward, the movement deliberate, steady, controlled. If they wanted silence, I thought, my eyes locking on theirs, they'd soon discover the danger of a voice they couldn't control. The clatter of forks and knives resumed after the staged theft of my grandmother's brooch, but the air in the ballroom hadn't lightened. Laughter returned. Conversations grew again, yet for me, the humiliation still sat like a stone in my chest. I moved the food around my plate without taking a bite, the rich aromas of roasted lamb and garlic potatoes wasted on an appetite long gone. Celine's voice carried over the din, bragging about a new endorsement deal as if the evening existed solely for her. My father raised his glass repeatedly, his face glowing with triumph. He believed he had everything under control, and the smugness in his posture was almost unbearable. Control doesn't always need shouting, I thought, stabbing a piece of asparagus with my fork. Sometimes it's just watching someone sink without throwing them a rope. The realization sent a steady calm through me. I observed silently, saying little, but every second my suspicion grew heavier. Something told me they weren't finished. They never stopped at just one wound. When my gaze drifted toward my mother, I caught what I thought might be a flicker of pity. But no, there was nothing soft in her expression. Her eyes locked onto mine, cold, unyielding, steady. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, as though daring me to notice her part in this spectacle. The serenity on her face wasn't accidental. It was calculated. A memory stirred. Me at 12 years old, crying in the hallway after a competition I had lost. She had leaned down, her voice sharp but low. "Don't embarrass us, Kristen. Keep it quiet." Tonight, her silence wasn't protection. It was weaponized. I sat back, folding my napkin on my lap to steady my hands. A mother's love is supposed to protect, I told myself, my throat tightening. Hers was a mask, painted carefully for society. There was no rescue in her eyes, only complicity. Around me, guests chattered freely, oblivious. But I noticed a waiter approach with another tray of champagne flutes. He set one down in front of Celine by mistake. My father's eyes snapped to it immediately, and with a curt gesture, he summoned the waiter to correct the error. The glass was swiftly lifted and placed before me instead. "Not mine," Celine said, wrinkling her nose. "I don't even like champagne." Guests nearby laughed politely at her remark, assuming it was all harmless. But I knew better. I watched every movement, stone-faced. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, coordinated, precise. My father leaned toward my mother, his voice low, but I caught it. "Can't even keep the glasses straight." His tone carried irritation, as if even the smallest detail of their plot had to be perfect. Celine smirked, her words sliding into the space between us like knives. "Don't worry, Dad. She'll drink it." I let the words roll over me without flinching, but inside, a quiet fury burned steady. Even in their cruelty, they wanted precision, no mistake, no chance of survival. They weren't just humiliating me, they were ensuring I wouldn't leave this evening standing tall. I stared at the poisoned glass in front of me. My fingers rested lightly against its stem, not lifting it, not rejecting it, just holding steady, as though I had accepted its place before me. Sometimes power isn't in speaking. It's in refusing to move. I let the moments replay in my mind, the seat near the restroom, the slideshow that erased me, the microphone cut, the stolen heirloom, each slight layered over the next, sharp edges pressing into me. But instead of breaking me down, each insult turned into fuel. Each betrayal hardened into focus. My eyes traced the bubbles still swirling faintly in the golden liquid. The glass sat untouched, and I intended to keep it that way. Tonight wasn't about drinking their poison. It was about watching them expose themselves. I lifted my gaze from the glass to my father. His expression was patient, waiting for me to fall into his trap. My mother met my eyes again, her face a mask of calm cruelty. Celine tilted her head, smirking, confident that the cornered prey would eventually surrender. But I wasn't prey. Not anymore. They thought I was the prey at this table, I told myself, leaning back with deliberate calm. But I had already chosen to be the hunter. The room had returned to its rhythm of laughter and chatter after the awkward moment with the poisoned glass, but it was clear that not everyone was at ease. I caught fragments of whispers when I passed groups of guests. Their voices dropped the moment I drew near, their eyes darting toward me before quickly shifting away. The incident had unsettled them, but no one dared say anything aloud. In families like mine, silence was currency. People bought their safety by pretending they hadn't seen what was right in front of them. But I knew someone had seen. Rowan, the young waiter, moved between tables carrying a tray, but his face betrayed him. His eyes flickered again and again to my glass, his steps just a little too hesitant. For a brief second, our eyes locked. He looked pale, uncertain, almost guilty. Then he looked away sharply, as if afraid someone else had noticed. Injustice rarely hides perfectly, I thought, leaning back in my chair. There's always at least one witness. The real question is whether they'll ever dare to speak. I allowed my face to stay calm, expressionless, though inside I felt the faintest spark of reassurance. Even if Rowan never said a word, I knew I wasn't imagining things. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't the only one who knew it. That knowledge didn't heal the wound, but it sharpened my certainty. They wanted me broken, erased. Instead, they had given me the clarity to stand taller. Rowan passed by again. Another waiter nudged him with a smirk. "You look pale, Rowan. Calm down." Rowan muttered, "It's nothing." But his voice lacked conviction. His eyes darted back to me for a fleeting second. That was enough. I lowered my gaze back to my untouched champagne flute, the golden liquid swirling with its ugly secret. My fury settled into something cold and sharp. Then, just as dessert plates began to appear, my sister Celine tapped her spoon against her glass. The sound rang out like a command, cutting through conversations and drawing every eye toward her. She smiled, bright and polished, the kind of smile she had perfected in years of pageants. I braced myself, knowing nothing good would follow. "Everyone," she began, her voice sweet and clear, "let's all raise a glass to Kristen." For a fleeting second, some guests looked relieved, expecting kindness, maybe even an overdue acknowledgement. But Celine's lips curled into a smirk. "To Kristen, the longest-running family project." Laughter erupted. Some laughed uncomfortably, eyes darting toward me as if apologizing. Others laughed freely, delighted to be given permission to mock me openly. "She really said that?" Someone near the front muttered, unable to contain their shock. Celine's grin widened. "Well, it's true. Finally, she finished something." The sound of glasses clinking rose around the table. My father clapped, proud. My mother beamed as though this was some shining example of family humor. The cruelty was no longer whispered, no longer hidden behind polite smiles. It was public, deliberate, merciless. I sat frozen, my back rigid, my hands still. The humiliation scalded, but my face betrayed nothing. Inside, shame burned, but it didn't spill over. It cooled into something harder. I memorized every word, every smirk, every laugh. A toast isn't always celebration, I thought. Sometimes it's execution. The urge to scream, to throw the glass, to storm from the room, it all surged and passed. I would not give them that. My tears stayed buried, my voice steady, my silence intentional. This moment wasn't the end. It was documentation, evidence. And someday, evidence would become judgment. I lifted my own glass just slightly, meeting Celine's eyes across the table. To everyone else, it looked like I had joined the toast, playing the dutiful sister. But I did not drink. I did not smile. My eyes stayed locked on hers, steady, unblinking. The guests misread the gesture, assuming compliance, assuming I had accepted my place. But I knew better. This was my first silent act of defiance, my refusal to bow, to clap, to participate in my own humiliation. Sometimes the strongest answer, I thought, my hand lowering the glass back onto the table, is not to clap, not to drink, not to bow. Celine smirked, as if she had buried me with her toast, but my gaze never wavered. If she thought her toast buried me, I told myself, she had no idea I was already digging their grave. The laughter from Celine's cruel toast still rang across the ballroom. Glasses clinked as people raised them, some out of obligation, others with genuine amusement. The atmosphere was manic, too bright, too loud, the way people overcompensate when something ugly lingers beneath the surface. I sat still, my own glass untouched, its stem cool against my fingertips. My hand never wavered, though my heart beat steady and fierce. They thought silence meant defeat, I told myself, staring into the golden swirl of the liquid. But silence is a blade, and I've been sharpening mine all night. Rowan, the young waiter, hovered nervously nearby, his eyes darting again and again toward my glass. He knew. His face was pale, his movements jerky, as though he wanted to speak but was terrified of the consequences. That small, nervous truth in his expression added to the tension gathering in the air. The room felt as though it was waiting, as though the walls themselves anticipated what was about to happen. I sat straighter, my silence hardening into calm, humiliation reshaping itself into something dangerous. And then it happened. One of my cousins stumbled as he tried to squeeze past the crowded tables, his elbow brushing against my arm. The glass tipped, teetering for a suspended moment before spilling its contents across the carpet. The splash was followed by an immediate reaction, a sharp, acrid smell rising into the air. The champagne hissed where it landed, bubbles sizzling as the liquid ate into the expensive fabric beneath. Wisps of smoke curled upward, gasps erupted from the crowd, chairs scraped as guests leaned forward to see. "What on earth? What's in that drink?" one guest exclaimed, eyes wide. Another voice, sharper and horrified, "That's not champagne!" I remained perfectly still, my hands folded neatly on the table, as if I had been expecting this. My mother stiffened across the room, her serene mask cracking for the first time. The color drained from her cheeks, but she didn't move. My father barked orders to the staff. "Clean this up now!" His voice harsh, his control slipping. Celine's smirk vanished instantly, her expression faltering as she realized what everyone else had just witnessed. The laughter from her toast died in her throat. Poison hides quietly, I thought, my gaze steady on the smoking carpet, until the world itself refuses to stay quiet. The ballroom descended into a silence so heavy it pressed against the walls. Whispers died mid-breath. Guests turned to look at me, then at my family, then back at the ruined patch of carpet still smoldering faintly. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for the glass or offer excuses. I simply sat, my back straight, as though the truth had already been written and spoken by forces larger than me. Rowan stood frozen near the serving cart, his hands trembling, eyes wide with the knowledge he had carried alone until this moment. He didn't need to speak now. The truth was visible for everyone. I scanned the room slowly. In my parents' faces, fear. In Celine's, disbelief. In the guests, horror, some disgust, some dawning recognition of what this night had truly been. In that silence, I thought, truth didn't need my voice. It screamed by itself. Then I pushed back my chair, the scrape against the marble floor echoing like a verdict. The sound cut through the hush, pulling every eye back to me. Guests held their breath, expecting tears, a breakdown, an outburst. My father leaned forward, eyes narrowing, trying to anticipate my next move. I looked at them all, at my family who had cornered me, poisoned me, humiliated me, and I let the power of the moment settle. One word left my lips, cold and sharp. Enough. The single word struck harder than any speech I could have prepared. Its weight filled the silence, carrying with it everything they had tried to bury me with. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to cry. The simplicity was enough to make the room freeze completely. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table. My mother's pearls shifted against her collarbone as she swallowed hard, her composure cracking again. Celine's face flushed red, her smirk gone, her confidence crumbling in the silence that followed my word. They wanted me silent, I thought, standing tall now, but they just handed me the stage. The silence after my single word, enough, was heavy enough to crush the room. No one moved, no one dared break the moment. I could feel every eye fixed on me, waiting for me to unravel, to scream, to storm out. But I did none of those things. Instead, I stood tall and walked with calm, measured steps toward the projector setup tucked at the edge of the ballroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate. Guests murmured in low voices, uncertain. "What is she doing?" someone whispered, their words traveling in the hush. I reached the stand and drew my phone from my clutch. My hands didn't shake this time. When they took my voice, I told myself as I connected it to the projector, I built another. Tonight, it's time to let it speak. My calm was not resignation. It was anticipation, the kind that builds before the strike of a hammer. The screen flickered once, twice, then came alive. A clean, modern logo appeared across it. K-Vantage Digital. The room shifted instantly, whispers rising louder now. "What is that?" one relative muttered. "Wait," another said, leaning forward. "Is that hers?" Images began to roll. Screenshots of websites I had built, campaigns that had gone global. Graphs spiked upward with revenue figures, names of international clients flashing on the screen. Logos of companies from Germany, Japan, the United States. Testimonials praising innovation and leadership, all with my name attached. Celine gasped audibly, her champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering against the floor. My mother flinched, her mask cracking again. My father rose halfway from his chair, his face twisting red. "This is nonsense," he barked, voice booming. "She's fabricating all this." But the evidence kept scrolling. The numbers were too precise, the documents too clear. A cousin muttered, "Wait, that's hers?" Another guest shook their head in disbelief. "She runs this." While we thought, I spoke over the noise, my voice even and strong. They called me a leech. They laughed at me, dismissed me. But while they ridiculed, I was building something that outgrew their world. I didn't need their approval. I created my own. The vindication pulsed through me, but I kept my posture calm. This wasn't gloating. This was revelation. The power in the room shifted, subtle, undeniable. The once dismissive whispers grew into awe. Guests who had barely looked at me all evening now stared with wide eyes. The silent outcast had become the one holding the center of attention. Then the next slide appeared, and the room seemed to stop breathing. Financial documents, spreadsheets, and transfer records filled the screen. Shell corporations linked by arrows, debt trails weaving into a single name. "Aldrich Vayner," I announced, my eyes on my father. "For years, you sold off pieces of your company, covering losses you never admitted to. You thought you were selling in the dark, keeping it hidden." Gasps rippled. "He sold shares?" a guest whispered. "Wait, who bought them?" another asked, leaning forward. The slide scrolled, the arrows converging into a single entity, my company, my name, my father's face drained of color. "No, this isn't—" His voice cracked, then failed. Rage filled his features, but his body betrayed him, trembling hands, stiff shoulders. "He thought he was selling secrets into the void," I said steadily. "But every deal he made, every desperate transaction, came back to me. Piece by piece, he gave me the very empire he wanted to deny me." The murmurs grew louder, now edged with disbelief, scandal, judgment. "She owns it?" someone said in shock. "He sold out his own family company?" another guest added, aghast. I stood firm, my words cutting clean. "He wanted me erased. Instead, he handed me everything." The shift in the room was complete. The same people who had laughed at Celine's cruel toast now turned openly to look at me with something close to respect, even awe. Their whispers were no longer mocking, but astonished, recalculating everything they thought they knew about me. Celine sat stiff, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly. My mother had gone silent, pearls trembling slightly against her collarbone as she adjusted them again and again. My father's fury could barely contain itself, but there was nothing left for him to deny. I returned to the center of the room, no longer the silent shadow in the corner, but the undeniable victor. Humiliation was their weapon, I said, scanning their faces one by one. Truth is mine. And then, looking directly into my father's eyes, I let the final words fall like a stone in water. And this is only the beginning of what you owe me. The ballroom was still buzzing from the revelations I had just unleashed. The screen behind me glowed with proof that I had turned every insult into an empire, every slight into a foundation. Yet I could feel the current of unease rippling through the guests. They weren't sure what would happen next. My father sat rigid at the main table, fists clenched, his eyes darting between me and the projector as though sheer rage might erase the evidence. My mother tried to keep her face smooth, but the tight grip she had on her pearls betrayed her. Celine sat frozen, pale, lips pressed shut. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened. Eustace Armand entered, calm, collected, carrying a sleek black briefcase. He was dressed in a sharp gray suit, nothing flashy, but his presence drew immediate whispers. Guests exchanged glances, murmurs growing louder as they recognized what his arrival meant. My father rose to his feet, desperate to seize control. "This is family business," he said, his voice booming with false authority. Eustace didn't flinch. He walked toward me, set the briefcase neatly on the table beside the projector, and said in a voice as steady as stone, "Not anymore. This is legal business." The hush that followed was absolute. For years they thought power meant money and control, I thought as I looked at my family. Tonight, power means paper and ink. The anticipation in the room built thick as smoke. Even the guests who had mocked me earlier leaned forward now, sensing the balance shifting again. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message lit up on the screen. "Everything's confirmed. They can't touch you." I exhaled slowly, the corners of my mouth tightening into a controlled smile. Timing, I thought, is everything, and timing is mine tonight. Eustace clicked open the briefcase, the metallic snap echoing like a gavel strike. He withdrew a stack of bound, notarized papers, each sealed with embossed stamps. And he laid them out carefully on the table for all to see. "What's happening?" a guest whispered audibly, leaning to her husband. Celine's voice, sharp but trembling, slipped through the silence. "This can't be real." My mother's mask faltered. She clutched her pearls tighter, her fingers white with pressure. The elegance she wore like armor cracked, fear creeping in. Eustace began distributing copies, then nodded to me. "Shall we?" The projector shifted again, showing official deeds and stock ownership documents, scanned in crisp resolution. Eustace spoke clearly, his tone formal and unshakable. "As of last year," he read, "Dahlia Morvan legally holds controlling shares of Vayner Enterprises, as well as full ownership of the family estate." Gasps filled the room. A few guests even applauded softly, too stunned to contain themselves. Cameras and phones appeared in hands, flashes snapping as they recorded the downfall of a family that had paraded itself as untouchable. My father lunged forward, slamming his palm against the table. "Lies!" he shouted, voice cracking. "She forged this!" Eustace didn't flinch. He held up the notarized copies and said, his voice sharp but calm, "Filed with the county clerk. Notarized, undeniable." Celine's face drained of color. The glamour she had worn so confidently all night was stripped away in seconds. She looked small now, her shoulders slumping as murmurs of judgment swirled around her. "They built their empire on arrogance," I said softly, my voice carrying across the room. "And I bought it back with silence." The climax of vindication hung heavy. My father sank back into his chair, trembling with impotent fury. My mother looked hollow, her mask shattered. Celine couldn't bring herself to meet my eyes. The humiliation that had been their weapon was theirs to carry now, exposed in the very space they had chosen to destroy me. Guests recorded videos, heads shaking in disbelief. "She owns everything now," a cousin muttered to no one in particular, his eyes wide. My aunt, the one who had once whispered that I should just be grateful for a party, sat stiff and red-faced, unable to meet my gaze. Her shame was almost a balm to my wounds. "Humiliation is temporary," I said aloud, my voice steady, strong. "Legacy is permanent." I stepped forward, taking the microphone once more. This time there was no screech, no silence. My voice carried, smooth and sharp. "This house, this company, this night, none of it belongs to you anymore," I said, staring straight at my father, my words slicing clean through the air. I let the final blow fall. "And tomorrow, the world will know too." The papers lay scattered on the tables, notarized and undeniable. The murmurs hadn't stopped since Eustace finished reading them aloud. My father sat pale and rigid, staring at the documents like they were ghosts that had come back to haunt him. Celine slumped in her chair, too stunned to maintain the perfect posture she had spent years practicing. My mother clutched her pearls so tightly, I wondered if they might snap. Around us, guests whispered, some refusing to meet my eyes out of guilt, others unable to contain the relief of seeing justice land where it belonged. Power doesn't always end with shouting, I thought, my chest steady as I surveyed the wreckage. Sometimes it ends with silence, when truth is undeniable. Relief coursed through me, tangled with exhaustion, but beneath it all was a strength I hadn't realized had grown so firm. I stood tall in the center of the ballroom, not needing to fight anymore, not needing to prove. The battle was over, the release was mine to claim, and then my gaze caught hers. Across the room, my grandmother, Eudora Finch, sat watching. While everyone else looked away, embarrassed or shaken, her eyes met mine directly. They were soft, filled not with pity, but with pride. In that instant, memory pulled me backward. I was 7 years old, standing barefoot on her porch, tears streaking my face after another fight with my parents. She had knelt down, cupped my chin gently, and whispered, "Strength isn't in how loud you fight, but in how long you stand." Now, decades later, her gaze anchored me. Her presence steadied me in a way no applause ever could. She didn't need to clap or cheer. Her eyes alone told me I had done exactly what she always knew I could. Comfort, gratitude, healing. The emotions rippled through me in waves. For so long, I had felt like I stood alone, but her eyes reminded me that even the smallest thread of love could hold someone together in the darkest storms. The guests around her shifted uncomfortably, still whispering. Some were ashamed, others fascinated, but I no longer cared what their reactions meant. My grandmother's steady pride was enough. My father finally broke the silence. His voice was hoarse, desperate. "You can't do this. You're nothing without us." The words landed with the weakness of a last punch thrown by a man already defeated. I turned toward him, my voice calm, steady. "That's what you've always feared, that I could be something without you." A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd, approval, agreement. For once, the room wasn't laughing at me. They were nodding, their gazes sharp with judgment turned against the family that had always felt untouchable. "It wasn't just about money or status," I narrated inside, my own thoughts clear as glass. "It was about chains, chains I finally chose to drop." I looked at Celine then. Her eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. For the first time all night, there was no smirk, no pose, no pageant smile. What I saw instead was fear and envy, and buried beneath the sharp glint of defeat, bitterness slipped from me, melting away as liberation took its place. For years, I had carried the weight of their disdain, their manipulation, their hunger to see me small. Tonight, I let it fall. I lifted the microphone one final time, but not for legal declarations or financial revelations. This time, it was for truth, for clarity. Family is supposed to be love, I said, my voice resonant in the silent hall. But when family becomes poison, survival means walking away. The words cut through the ballroom, and I meant them for every guest, every recording device, every person who might hear this later and recognize themselves. American values ran through my mind: resilience, rebuilding, second chances. I thought of all the people who had carried scars from the ones meant to protect them. They would understand what I meant when I said survival was not shameful. It was strength. Sadness touched me then, bittersweet. Not every ending comes with reconciliation, not every wound with apology, but empowerment rises even when sorrow lingers. I wasn't leaving to mend the family. They had chosen their legacy. I was leaving to live mine. I gathered my things, slipping my phone back into my clutch. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor as I walked toward the exit. Guests parted silently, some still filming, some whispering, but none stopping me. The weight of chains I had carried for decades was gone. I paused at the threshold, glanced back once more, not in longing, not in regret, but in finality. I wasn't leaving empty-handed, I thought as I stepped into the cool night air. I was leaving free. The ballroom had not recovered from the strike I had delivered with Eustace's documents. My father sat silent, pale as marble, his fury strangled by the truth spread across every table. My mother's pearls trembled against her throat with every shallow breath. Celine sat broken, her once polished smile shattered, her eyes glassy with the realization that she no longer commanded the stage. Around us, the guests shifted, torn between loyalty and admiration. Some stared at me with awe, some avoided my gaze, unwilling to face the fact that they had laughed along until the tide turned. For years, I thought as I straightened my shoulders, they called me the weakest. Tonight, I became the strongest voice in the room. I no longer felt the burn of humiliation. Instead, I carried control in every step, deliberate and measured. Everything I did now was intentional. The storm they had unleashed all evening had culminated in their own undoing. The climax demanded one last strike, one last symbol to seal what had been revealed. I walked slowly toward the main table, every eye following me. The poisoned glass still sat there, untouched, shimmering under the light. My hand closed around its stem. The room held its breath. I set the glass gently down in front of my father, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. "This was meant for me," I said. "I return it to its rightful owner." Gasps erupted. "She knew all along," someone whispered behind me. "My God," another voice said, horrified. "They tried to poison her." My father's hand twitched, but he could not lift the glass. His fingers trembled above it before retreating to his lap. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, crushed by the weight of what he had tried to bury me with. "They wanted to end me with poison," I narrated silently. "But the poison was always their own legacy rotting inside them." I turned then, facing the room. "You all saw." "You all heard," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "They erased me, mocked me, tried to destroy me. Tonight, the truth destroyed them." The murmurs grew into a wave. Some guests nodded, others clapped softly, hesitant but real. The judgment had shifted entirely. What they once dismissed as weakness, they now recognized as survival. Celine snapped, her voice sharp and desperate. You think this makes you better than us? I looked at her evenly. No, it makes me free from you. The word struck harder than any insult. My father's head dropped, my mother's face drained of color. Celine's lips pressed tight in rage. The social mask they had crafted for decades was gone, shattered under the eyes of everyone they had sought to impress. There was no recovering from this. I picked up my clutch, lifted my chin, and began walking toward the exit. The guests parted in silence, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble like a gavel striking judgment. I wasn't leaving defeated, I thought with clarity. I was leaving with everything that mattered, my freedom, my power, my name. The doors loomed ahead, and with each step the noise of the ballroom dimmed behind me. When I reached them, I paused only for a moment, glancing back one last time, not with longing, not with regret, but with the certainty of finality. Outside, the night air was cool, cleansing, filled with promise. I inhaled deeply, letting the weight of the evening lift from my shoulders. They thought the story ended tonight, I whispered to myself as I stepped into the open air. But my beginning was only just written.